In a book by Peter Block titled The Answer to How is Yes, the author is quoted as saying, "Speed is a defense against depth and meaning. Nothing important happens quickly," which I'm using as my justification for why this series will go on forever, or at least 41 episodes, because that's how long it'll take me to read. All the chapters to finish this book. My name's Tricia Sulpizio. I'm your host for another episode of Tea and Bedtime Stories. It's a podcast for anyone who's a lifelong learner and lover of books. In this episode, we will continue reading A Farewell to Arms, a novel by Ernest Hemingway, published in 1929. Last time we read Chapter 4 in Book 1, and now we'll continue the story of Chapter 5, Para Siempre. After the chapter reading, I will follow up with quick facts and my impressions. So let's begin with Book 1, Chapter 5. The next afternoon, I went to call on Miss Barclay again. She was not in the garden, and I went to the side door of the villa where the ambulances drove up. Inside, I saw the head nurse, who said Miss Barclay was on duty. "There's a war on, you know." I said I knew. "You're the American in the Italian army?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "How did you happen to do that? Why didn't you join up with us?" "I don't know," I said. "Could I join now?" "I'm afraid not. Tell me, why did you join up with the Italians?" "I was in Italy," I said, "and I spoke Italian." "Oh," she said, "I'm learning it. It's a beautiful language." "Somebody said you should be able to learn it in 2 weeks." "Oh, I'll not learn it in 2 weeks. I've studied it for months now." "You must come and see her after 7 o'clock if you wish. She'll be off then. But don't bring a lot of Italians." "Not even for the beautiful language?" "No, nor for the beautiful uniforms." "Good evening," I said. "Arrivederci, tenente." "Arrivederla." I saluted and went out. It was impossible to salute foreigners as an Italian without embarrassment. The Italian salute never seemed made for export. The day had been hot. I had been up the river to the bridgehead at Plava. It was there the offensive was to begin. It had been impossible to advance on the far side the year before because there was only one road leading down from the pass to the pontoon bridge, and it was under machine gun and shell fire for nearly a mile. It was not wide enough for either to carry all the transport for an offensive, and the Austrians could make a shambles of it. But the Italians had crossed and spread out a little way on the far side to hold about 1.5 miles of the Austrian side of the river. It was a nasty place, and the Austrians should not have let them hold it. I suppose it was mutual tolerance because the Austrians still kept a bridgehead further down the river. The Austrian trenches were above on the hillside only a few yards from the Italian lines. There had been a little town, but it was all rubble. There was what was left of a railway station and a smashed permanent bridge that could not be repaired and used because it was in plain sight. I went along the narrow road down towards the river, left the car at the dressing station under the hill, crossed the pontoon bridge, which was protected by a shoulder of the mountain, and went through the trenches in a smashed down town and all along the edge of the slope. Everybody was in the dugouts. There were racks of rockets standing to be touched off to call for help from the artillery or signal with if the telephone wires were cut. It was quiet, hot, and dirty. I looked across the wire at the Austrian lines. Nobody was in sight. I had a drink with a captain that I knew in one of the dugouts and went back across the bridge. A new wide road was being finished that would go over the mountain and zigzag down to the bridge. When this road was finished, the offensive would start. It came down through the forest in sharp turns. The system was to bring everything down the new road and take the empty trucks, carts, and loaded ambulances and all returning traffic up the old narrow road. The dressing station was on the Austrian side of the river under the edge of the hill, and stretcher bearers would bring the wounded back across the pontoon bridge. It would be the same when the offensive started. As far as I could make out, the last mile or so of the new road where it started to level out would be able to be shelled steadily by the Austrians. It looked as though it might be a mess. But I found a place where the cars would be sheltered after they had passed the last bad-looking bit, and I could wait for the wounded to be brought across the pontoon bridge. I would have liked to drive over the new road, but it was not yet finished. It looked wide and well made with a good grade, and the turns looked very impressive, where you could see them through openings in the forest on the mountainside. The cars would be all right with their good metal-to-metal brakes, and anyway, coming down they would not be loaded. I drove back up the narrow road. 2 carabinieri held the car up. A shell had fallen while we waited. 3 others fell up the road. They were 77s and came with a wishing rush of air. The hard bright burst and flash, and then gray smoke that blew across the road. The carabinieri waved us to go on. Passing where the shells had landed, I avoided the small broken places and smelled the high explosive and the smell of blasted clay and stone and freshly shattered flint. I drove back to Gorizia and our villa, and as I said, went to call on Miss Barkley, who was on duty. At dinner, I ate very quickly and left for the villa where the British had their hospital. It was very large and beautiful. There were fine trees in the grounds. Miss Barkley was sitting on a bench in the garden. Miss Ferguson was with her. They seemed glad to see me, and in a while Miss Ferguson excused herself and went away. "I'll leave you two," she said. "You get along very well without me." "Don't go, Helen," Miss Barkley said. "I'd really rather. I must write some letters." "Good night," I said. "Good night, Mr. Henry." "Don't write anything that will bother the censor." "Don't worry, I only write about what a beautiful place we live in and how brave the Italians are. That way you'll be decorated. That will be nice. Good night, Catherine." "I'll see you in a little while," Miss Barkley said. Miss Ferguson walked away in the dark. "She's nice," I said. "Oh, yes, she's very nice. She's a nurse." "Aren't you a nurse?" "Oh, no. I'm something called a VAD. We work very hard, but no one trusts us." "Why not?" "They don't trust us when there's nothing going on. When there is really work, they trust us." "What's the difference?" "A nurse is like a doctor. It takes a long time to be. A VAD is a shortcut." "I see." "The Italians didn't want women so near the front, so we're all on very special behavior. We don't go out." "I can come here, though." "Oh, yes, we're not cloistered." "Let's drop the war." "It's very hard. There's no place to drop it." "Let's drop it anyway." "All right." We looked at each other in the dark. I thought she was very beautiful, and I took her hand. She let me take it, and I held it and put my arm around under her arm. "No," she said. I kept my arm where it was. "Why not?" "No." "Yes," I said. "Please." I leaned forward in the dark to kiss her, and there was a sharp, stinging flash. She had slapped my face hard. Her hand had hit my nose and eyes, and tears came in my eyes from the reflex. "I'm so sorry," she said. I felt I had a certain advantage. "You were quite right." "I'm dreadfully sorry," she said. "I just couldn't stand the nurse's evening off aspect of it." I didn't mean to hurt you. I did hurt you, didn't I? She was looking at me in the dark. I was angry and yet certain, seeing it all ahead like the moves in a chess game. You did exactly right, I said. I don't mind it at all. Poor man. You see, I've been leading a sort of funny life, and I never even talk English. And then you are so very beautiful. I looked at her. You don't need to say a lot of nonsense, I said. I said I was sorry. We do get along. Yes, I said, and we have gotten away from the war. She laughed. It was the first time I'd ever heard her laugh. I watched her face. You are sweet, she said. No, I'm not. Yes, you are a dear. I'd be glad to kiss you if you don't mind. I looked in her eyes and put my arm around her as I had before and kissed her. I kissed her hard and held her tight and tried to open her lips. They were closed tight. I was still angry, and as I held her, suddenly she shivered. I held her close against me, and I could feel her heart beating, and her lips opened, and her head went back against my hand, and then she was crying on my shoulder. Oh, darling, she said. You will be good to me, won't you? What the hell? I thought. I stroked her hair and patted her shoulder. She was crying. You will, won't you? She looked up at me. Because we are going to have a strange life. After a while, I walked with her to the door of the villa, and she went in, and I walked home. Back at the villa, I went upstairs to the room. Rinaldi was lying on his bed. He looked at me. So you make progress with Miss Barkley? We are friends. You have that pleasant air of a dog in heat. I did not understand the word. Of a what? He explained. You, I said, have the pleasant air of a dog who... Stop it, he said. In a little while we would say insulting things. He laughed. Good night, I said. Good night, little puppy. I knocked over his candle with the pillow and got into bed in the dark. Rinaldi picked up the candle, lit it, and went on reading. So that concludes Chapter 5 of Book 1. Quick facts, and then my impressions. In the last episode, I did say that Ernest was in the Italian army, but it's really unclear. I might have misspoken because in all of his pictures, he's wearing a U.S. insignia, but no stripes. And it's kind of interesting that she called him Mr. Henry. And I don't know. I don't know what his official status was, but I know that he was promoted to second lieutenant, or to first lieutenant, when he received an accommodation from the Italian army. There is a photo of his Silver Cross, I believe, was the medal he got for valor. And that was given to him by the Italians. And he had obviously been a second lieutenant and then became first lieutenant after he recovered from his injuries. But I don't know. If you know, please tell me, because I would be very curious to get that straight. I can't find a good source of information on that, but anyway. But he was likely enlisted as a second lieutenant in the Italian army to try to boost their numbers, maybe, or maybe that's how he got paid. I'm guessing. I know when the Italians first got involved in the conflict, they only had 300,000 enlisted, and by the end of it, a few years later, they had over 5 million. And he got in the early stages, I think in 2017, about a year and a half before the war ended. About a year, yeah. And yeah, the Italians suffered greatly of the 5 million almost 500,000 were killed and nearly 1 million wounded. And it's kind of cute when he says arrivederci, or she says arrivederci. That's the generic term. It's more like formal. You say that to anybody. It's the conjugation is each other, whereas he changes it to the more familiar arrivederla, which is the female conjugation of that verb. Anyway, the Italian salute that he was talking about, it does look a bit more awkward than the one that we see today, because it's more crooked the way they move their arms. And I did find a photo, and I put it in a link in the description. But it's kind of interesting because the Italians actually changed their salute they adopted the Roman salute at the behest of Mussolini during the rise of fascism. So they went from what looked similar to the American salute to that arms outstretched or whatever thing that they do. They call that the Roman salute, which ironically, Americans used to teach their children the Roman salute when doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And they passed a law in 1942 to change that so that we now put our hand over our heart when we are saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And in the description, I also found a photo of children in 1942 doing the Roman salute. Bunch of little elementary school kids. So you can see that for yourself. So it's interesting to see how the symbolism has changed over time, and what used to mean something different, I don't know, has multiple meanings now, which really bothers me in some level, just because I'm kind of a purist. Obviously, I study communication and I teach communication, and words and meaning should matter. Words are symbols. So symbols are gestures are also symbols, or can be. And they should have a direct correlation to a meaning. And when those meanings change, it's really confusing for all humans. And it's unfortunate for all of us, because we need to be able to pass down something to future generations. And we use words as, a representation of our legacy. The stories that we tell, those traditions we hold, those are all things that we pass on to future generations. And if they don't mean anything, then what a waste of time. Anyway, I digress. But the other fact about saluting I wanted to say, because he said he gave the salute to the nurse that was on duty, and you don't salute indoors. My ex-husband is retired Air Force, and he used to hate seeing that in movies. It was like a huge pet peeve of his when people would be indoors wearing their hat or indoors saluting without their hat on. And funnily, the salute it depends who you ask and which country it is. But in American tradition, soldiers used to tip their hat to officers, meaning they would take off their hat, and then that became cumbersome or laborious. So they just started putting their hand to their hat to symbolize the same thing, like a shortcut. And then it progressed into a much deeper meaning of respect. But anyway, carabinieri, when he talked about the two carabinieri holding up the car or whatever, that's the word for military police, Italian military police. So those are all the quick facts that I have. My impressions, the whole exchange between the main character and that first nurse that he talked to at the hospital, not Miss Barkley, for me, highlights his struggle. He just seems like he does not fit in. And maybe that's what that little exchange was meant to convey. I'm reading into it, obviously. But he just seemed very uncomfortable with himself and his choices, and he just appears to be a fish out of water. I think that was purposeful. I don't know. But I know we've all had similar experiences where we kind of put on a persona that doesn't reflect our personality or our values, right? Sometimes we'll try on clothes and it's like, no, that's not me. And fashion is a language for sure. That's the whole reason the military requires the use of uniforms and the whole pomp and circumstance around it, because it sends a message to the wearer as well as the observer, right? It's not only sending a message to the people that see the uniform, but the people that wear the uniform. That's why it's one of the first things that you earn in boot camp is your right to wear a uniform. First you get fatigues or whatever, and then once you pass a certain level, you get to get issued the actual uniform. And it's like a big deal, and it's meant to be a big deal because it does change how we see ourselves. And yeah, uniforms are intended to dispel individuality and promote conformity and cohesion within a group. So changing clothes doesn't change us necessarily, but it can change the way we are seen and treated, which then changes how we see ourselves. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Glory. If you haven't, you should. It's a great film with Denzel Washington and Matthew Broderick and others. But it's about the Civil War and the 54th Infantry. They were a group of soldiers that were segregated because of their skin color and subsequent social class. And the story like kind of highlights their desire at one point to get their uniform. Like, it was such a big deal for them, and it helps us to understand how much power there are in these symbols. Right? Those men knew that if they were wearing that uniform, they would be treated with more respect, and that it would also help them legitimize their service to the country. Right? That suit possessed a unique social power that other clothes just don't, I mean, in their own way convey, but that had special significance. And all communication is symbolic, right? Every interaction we use symbols. The language that I speak is a symbol. It's an organized set of symbols. And we use symbols to communicate, to connect, to help understand each other. But we decide on what those symbols mean arbitrarily. Meaning, like, nothing has any meaning until we collectively assign it a meaning. And then we all have to adhere to what that, we have to be fidelitous in our use of language. Nobody says what they mean anymore, it seems like. And nobody means what they say. And that, unfortunately, like, we can escape personal responsibility if we don't own our words, if we're not thoughtful. And I don't know, it bothers me, as you can tell. But nothing has power unless we give it power over us. And all symbolic power that we have is within us to give. And so, like, for that reason, I don't care if someone uses a Roman salute. I know it's associated negatively with, like, Nazis and all that drama, and I don't know. I grew up around neo-Nazis, so I just think they're idiots, but I don't try to crap on other people for what they hold, value or hold dear, because I don't want them crapping on what I value or I hold dear. But sometimes we take things a little bit too seriously. But I don't know. Some people have a very high need for affiliation, and the artifacts of their organizations are extremely important to them. Like, their entire identity is wrapped up in their organization, how they affiliate themselves. And if you crap on their team or whatever, it's like you're crapping on their mom. And you're like, it's just a football game. Like, get over it. I don't know. But that's not for me to say. I don't try to, I don't particularly see the value in any of that, but I don't try to condemn anybody else who does until it becomes antisocial. And all that behavior taken to the extreme always becomes antisocial. Because people become ethnocentric and they start to believe that what they think or what they support or what they value is superior to everything else. And it's not. But they start behaving like they're better than other people, and the whole thing is stupid. So I just be careful. They're just symbols. And they only mean what we want them to mean. Anyway. The interaction between the tenente and Miss Barclay is completely bizarre to me. I don't understand why she held his hand and then said no. I don't know how she got away with slapping the crap out of him. Why did she then ask him to kiss her and then not kiss him back? The whole thing, I don't know. Why did she end with that speech about them being, living a strange life together? I don't understand any of that. And him, like, why did he throw himself at her after saying, like, 2 words? I mean, I know she was really intimate in the things that she was saying to him, but he barely said anything to her, according to the dialogue, and then he just sneaks up on her, gets slapped, gets mad about it, doesn't say anything. And then when she asks him to kiss her, he forces himself on her again. I don't know. I don't understand their game. If you were to diagram their relationship using like Knapp's model of the stages of relationship development, which I highly recommend you look at, it's really important work. But anyway, I'll put a link to it in the description. But basically, it's a stair step, right? First, when you try to bond with somebody, like get married, build a life with someone, you go through these stages, and the first stage is always just initiation, right? You like the looks of each other. Then you start to experiment, see if, you have any similarities or any common interests, or there's nothing offensive about the other. They completely skipped over both of those things. And immediately, because she's talking to him about personal details of her life, like really personal stuff, they go right to the intensification stage, right? Which just means they're like halfway to bonding without knowing anything about each other. And when after she kisses him, now she's like trying to jump to the integration stage, which is the 4th stage before marriage, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't find that believable. Well, actually, I've seen a lot of hopeful couples that start just as quickly, but unfortunately, all the research I've read shows that there's a strong correlation between how quickly a relationship starts and how quickly it ends. So I guess it goes back to, like, nothing important happens quickly, like Mr. Block said. Anyway, we'll see where this relationship goes. It's not off to a great start, in my opinion, but that's all I have for Chapter 5. So in the next episode, I'll continue with Book 1, Chapter 6 of A Farewell to Arms. Please join me next time for more tea and bedtime stories. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for listening.